Welcome to Life L'Chaim. On today's show, host Lee Lazerson talks with Dr. Ira Sheskin, professor of geography at the University of Miami, about the state of the Middle East. We'll be right back after these messages.
With us today is Dr. Ira Sheskin. Doctor, you are professor and chair of the University of Miami's Geography and Regional Studies Department. And I know from listening to you, you've been on many talk shows and television shows and are renowned as a Middle East expert. So thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Doctor, we're a long ways in now to the Arab Spring, the so-called Arab Spring. What's the state of the Middle East today?
Certainly a lot different than it was before the Arab Spring, but not all of it's been in a positive direction. Okay, I think in fact many people have started to call it the Arab Winter. You know, it started in Tunisia, spread to Egypt, Libya, Syria, several other countries as well. There have been some positive changes that have come out of it. You know, in places like Saudi Arabia, in Morocco, in Jordan. But in the main Arab country, and the most important Arab country, which is Egypt, the little bit of transition there's been to democracy has been a pretty rough road. Okay, you know, no one certainly in the West, very few people were happy with the election of Morsi. He didn't seem to be doing a good job. He's now been displaced. The military is running the place. You know, I think it goes back to President Bush, who wanted to get democracy in the Middle East, a laudable goal. But there's more to democracy than just holding an election. Because somebody holds an election doesn't mean you have democracy. The winner still needs to be respectful of the points of view of those people in the minority. You still need an independent judiciary. You need a military that's not going to run the show. You need a free press. You need a whole group of non-governmental organizations that exist in, you know, most of the Western democracies that simply have no tradition yet in Egypt. Right. It may be too early to call it dead, in the sense that, you know, if you look at things like the French Revolution, it took a while really before, you know, things got to the point of what we would call a true democracy in France.
With 2020 hindsight, are there things that the U.S. could have done with respect to their policy towards Libya, towards Egypt, that may have made a difference in how it's turned out and where we are today?
You know, I'm not certain that the United States anymore has the power to do those types of things. I think what we did in Egypt was, you know, we supported the movement toward democracy. We gave up on Mubarak, I think, and I think had we continued to support him, I don't think it would have made any difference. I think he was due to leave. And I think what got the Egyptians upset was that he was tailoring his son to take over from him. And the Egyptians knew he was 80, will soon be out from under him, and then he's tailoring his son to take over, almost as if it was becoming kind of a dictatorship / monarchy in Egypt. So I don't think the U.S. could have done very much. What we did in Libya, I think, was actually worked out in the end quite well. I mean, people have always been screaming, why is it the United States who always gets stuck stepping in these cases? Well, we managed to convince France and Italy to take the lead on Libya. And yes, we led from behind. I have no trouble with that phrase. We got rid of Gaddafi, who was a thorn in the side of the world for decades, right? Have we replaced it with a government that's better? Probably, but you know, Libya right now is close to being a failed state.
Right.
There are parts of it that are not being governed by the central government, right? There are tribal differences, a whole bunch of things. So, you know, Libya, in the end, I think without Gaddafi is better, but I'm not sure how much better it is.
Because I think you can hypothesize that, you know, would the Middle East be different had the U.S. left Saddam Hussein in place, left Mubarak in place, left Gaddafi in place, the strong men who hold their countries together, and now with the relevant chaos that exists in many of these countries.
Yeah, but you know, it was bound to happen eventually. I think in the end, democracy is the best form of government. but a country really needs to be ready for it, okay? It might have been a little bit early for the Arab world to be ready for democracy. They might have needed a few decades more before this happened, so it might have happened sooner. And I think it came out in part from what happened in Iraq, where some of the people began to see some democracy. And another thing that I think led to the Arab Spring, which I think is fascinating, was some of the corruption in Israel itself. You know, you look back about 3 to 4 years, and there was a spate of Israeli politicians getting arrested, right, being charged, and Al Jazeera television was covering that. And the Egyptians could see that in Israel, when a politician does wrong, that they answer to the courts. And that wasn't happening in Egypt. And so I think that also put ideas in the heads of many of the more liberal Egyptians. Of course, you know, when the networks covered the Al Tahrir Square uprisings, etc., and they were interviewing the Google employee, right, in Egypt, everyone seemed to be under the impression that this was a liberal, you know, democratic, devoted group of people who wanted to see Mubarak overthrown. But of course, once he was overthrown, he got replaced with, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood, right, Morsi.
But there was so much talk in advance of the Brotherhood coming to power there.
That's true.
And he still was able to rise. He still had the tacit support of the United States. We were still sending billions over, and still doing.
And we still are, yeah.
Right.
Well, you know what the problem is there's 85 million Egyptians. There's the peace treaty with Israel. There's the Suez Canal. There's the fact that Egypt is really the central country in the Arab world. And if we lose our influence there, we could have some problems. I'll give you an example. Originally, the United States was supposed to help Egypt build the Aswan Dam. For that, the United States demanded that Egypt basically become a U.S. ally and not be neutral. The Egyptians didn't want to do that. So the Soviet Union stepped in, helped the Egyptians build the dam, got their military in, and changed the entire Middle East. So I think what we need to be careful about, and that's the reason why, you know, we're continuing to give some money to Egypt. We've cut back some to let them know how annoyed we are, right, with what's going on. But if we completely break off from Egypt and say, we're not going to give you folks another penny, we lose our influence in there. Part of our influence and part of keeping that peace treaty going is that we keep on funding the military. Okay. So I think we probably, you know, it's one of these things where there's no good choice. Okay.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to certainly more to talk about with respect to Syria, Iran, Israel. So we got a lot to cover.
Great.
We'll be right back. We're back with Dr. Ira Sheskin. Doctor, let's switch a little bit to Syria and what's been happening with Assad in a civil war.
Sure.
And the killing of many civilians in Syria, and President Obama's handling of the many adults and children who died from being gassed. How does that factor in to the overall Middle East policy and the view of U.S. in that region?
Well, you know, to give it a little broader context, of course, an overall issue is when is it time to intervene in something like that? You know, if you asked President Clinton what his major failure was during his 8 years in office, he will tell you that it was the fact that he sat on the sidelines while the slaughter went on in Rwanda. And so you have to ask yourself, at what point does it get so bad that it's time for the United States to intervene? Now, when the situation with Assad first came up, it looked like, and people were reporting that Assad's days are numbered, that he won't last. It's clear now that he has kind of, you know, gotten past that, and that he is going to last. The question is, if we went in now and helped the Syrian rebels, then we're not sure who's going to take over. And it could, in fact, whoever takes over, could in fact be significantly worse than Assad. The other thing that we could see as well is we could see Syria fall apart. We could get a Kurdish state in the north, a Druze state, an Alawite state, okay, and maybe in the center have a Sunni Arab state. We could end up with 3 or 4 states coming out of Syria, some of which are run by, Muslim Islamists, let's call them. Okay, and that probably would not be good. So I think one of the reasons, I think we were getting to the point where the slaughter in Syria was at such a stage that we and other countries would almost have to step in and do something. And I think we backed away from that. And I think we backed away for good reason. Now, with the use of the chemical weapons, of course, that crossed the red line. And that's probably something that Obama made a mistake saying. Because once you establish a red line, if you don't stick to it, you lose some of your credibility. There's an on the other hand coming here, because these things are never all that easy.
Well, we Jews have 3 on the other hand.
Yes, right. Yes, we certainly do. The on the other hand is that we did manage, after all, as a result of their using the chemical weapons, to get the Syrians to admit that they had the chemical weapons, which they were refusing to do. And it looks like the Syrians are now cooperating in getting the chemical weapons removed. Lots of the reports say they're reporting the things. Whether they're going to report it all, they're going to try to hide. It's very easy to hide some of the stuff, right? Whether they'll do that or not, but they do seem to be cooperating. So if the result of this, and I think we just kind of fell into it, John Kerry said something, and then they came back and said, yeah, we'll do that, right? And I don't think I'm not even sure it was part of U.S. policy to do that. But it may be better that we get the chemical weapons out of there than we punish them a bit with some bombing, which would clearly kill some innocent people. Okay, but it's something we might have had to do, and that's life. On the other hand, if the chemical weapons fell into the hands of the Islamists after Assad does fall, if he falls, you have an even worse situation. So right now, I don't think we're going to even try to intervene until we can do everything we can about disenabling the chemical weapons. I'm not sure that's a word, but we got the idea of getting rid of the chemical weapons. And then, you're looking at, they've stopped counting. It's clearly, by all accounts, over 100,000 dead, and millions of refugees, and millions of internally displaced people. And it doesn't look like it's something going away, and at some point we may still need to go in.
But how does it affect the United States' view in the Middle East when, by all accounts, power is what motivates those governments in the Middle East, and this lack of power, or perceived lack of power, depending on which side you're on, has got to have an effect?
Yeah, I believe that's true. Okay, and I believe that at some point we may still have to go in there, okay, particularly if it looks like the Islamists are going to take power, because there are some people who are among the rebels opposing Assad who are reasonable people and could establish a reasonable government. It's another situation where I think, Alan Dershowitz has said a number of times that sometimes there's no good solution to any problem. You're kind of damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But I think at some point we may still have to go into Syria, hopefully with the support of the rest of the world, if only to stop the slaughter.
Okay. Switching to the controlling state with respect to Syria, Iran. And obviously with new president at the helm and softer words that he's espousing, now this move towards maybe a negotiation, is that in your opinion the right way to go, or do we need to be more strong?
I think it's the right way to go as long as you're very, very cautious in doing it. Okay? I think that under all situations like this, you want to exhaust every possibility before you actually go to war. Okay, Iran is another very large country with, over 75 million people. It clearly is developing, in my mind, the evidence is clear that they want to develop nuclear weapons. They have to completely back away from that. And I don't think now is the time to relax sanctions. In fact, now is the time for Congress to be asking for more sanctions. I'm not sure it's the best time to actually implement more sanctions. I would rather see this play out for a few weeks. But if the Iranians know that the current sanctions are staying in place, which is what's got them to the table, okay, and if they know that, unless they do more than show a pretty PowerPoint presentation, which is the way they started out, unless they're really making concessions and going to agree to remove the underground facility, and they're going to agree to have full inspections by the IAEA, right, et cetera, and be completely open about this, then I think we need to keep the sanctions up and threaten further sanctions on the Iranian people to get them to back away from this.
Okay.
You know what I find most fascinating?
Well, hold your thought.
Sure.
Hold your thought, because we're going to take a break and come back and talk a little bit more about Iran, and then switch to Israel and how that all relates.
Right.
Okay? We'll be right back. We're back with Dr. Ira Sheskin. Before the break, we were talking about Iran and a negotiating strategy, if you will. And there's nuances that have taken a role with Saudi Arabia being more vocal with the U.S. and them being upset with the U.S. policy towards Iran and Syria.
Right. Well, what I find most fascinating about the whole situation is Israel's probably had nuclear weapons in some time in the 1950s. And the Saudis have never really strongly complained about that. They are clearly more concerned in Saudi Arabia about Iran getting nuclear weapons. That's the Sunni-Shiite divide. Saudi Arabia being Sunni, Iran being Shiite. So we now see Israel and Saudi Arabia kind of saying to the United States, you really need to be strong in these negotiations and don't back away and don't take, half-ass measures and agree to them. I mean, John Kerry did say a bad agreement is worse than no agreement at all. And I think Kerry's right on that, and I think that Israel and Saudi Arabia are going to keep up the pressure on the United States. It could be a little bit of bad cop, good cop, right, where Saudi Arabia and Israel are being the bad cop and putting pressure on the United States, so the United States can say to the Iranians, we can't possibly move in that direction, you need to be more forthcoming. Could be some of that.
Do you think if the time comes that Israel will have to act alone?
If they have to act alone, they will act alone, okay? Although I would point out that, look, Israel bombed in 1981, right, the nuclear reactor in Baghdad. And in fact, when they flew their planes on the way back, they flew over Saudi territory. The Saudis knew what the Israelis had done, and they didn't shoot down the Israeli planes returning to Israel. I have a feeling we will find out someday that the Saudis knew exactly what the Israelis were going to do. Okay, they won't admit it for decades, but I have a feeling that that's the case.
And why? Because you know that there has to be this high-level communication between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Do you think there'll ever come a point in the history of the world where Saudi Arabia will have a peace treaty with Israel and that they'll be open and public about their level of communication?
Yes. Yes, I think Israel has gradually been accepted into the Middle East. I think there are clearly elements within the Arab world and the Muslim world that still want to see Israel disappear. But I think if you take a look, Egypt was kicked out of the Arab League for signing the Camp David Agreement, but was let back in eventually, wasn't it? And I think we're seeing, there are high-level contacts between Israel and the Gulf states as well. Israel and Jordan have been at peace since 1948, except for a few days in June of 1967. Okay. And so I think, and there are two peace treaties, right, between Israel and there's one between Israel and Jordan, another between Israel and Egypt. Israel is not in the same situation that it was in 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. It's much more accepted, and there are lots of high-level contacts between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think those will continue.
Okay. I want to switch to the topic to Israeli politics.
Sure.
And the peace plans that have been put forward, and certainly the two-state solution, which has been part of the history of Israel for as long as it's been in existence. What is your opinion of the two-state solution? Will it happen? Do you have a perceived timetable?
Well, the two-state solution's been around since the original partition plan of Palestine in 1947 was a two-state solution. And so it's always been there. Okay? It will eventually happen. I think there's no other choice than having the two-state solution, and here's why. Israel clearly wants to remain as a Jewish state. Okay? And to remain as a Jewish state, right now, core Jews make up about 76% of the Israeli population. If you put in non-Jewish members of Jewish households, particularly among the Russians who came, okay, Jews and others are about 78, 79% of Israel's population. Now, given that, that's fine. Right now, if you take all of the territory between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, core Jews are 49%, 49.3% at the moment, of that population. So Jews are already a minority between the river and the sea, which means that if you absorb
There's
that
some
territory...
who dispute those numbers.
Some would dispute those numbers. My numbers come from Sergio Della Pergola, whose article I published in the American Jewish Yearbook, and who's testified in front of the Knesset and is the most respected academic in terms of the demography of world Jews. Okay, but yes, there are people who dispute those numbers. Even though if you agree with the people who dispute the numbers, so Jews are then 60% of the people between the river and the sea. I'm not sure that what the Zionist movement had in mind when they created Israel was a country that would only be 60% Jewish, and eventually probably go down. Now, what is true is that Jewish birth rates in Israel are quite high. In fact, they are among the highest of developed countries in the world. The number of children that Israeli Jews are having, even if you leave out the ultra-Orthodox, is quite high. Way higher than American Jews, by the way. Okay? And the Arab birth rates are, in fact, coming down. That's all true. But still, I mean, if it's 60% Jewish now, so in another 20 years it might be 55% Jewish. Can you still maintain the Jewish character of the state when close to half the population doesn't believe in the state? No. So you can keep the territories. You can, if you want, you can't keep the territories, have democracy, and have it stay Jewish. And a geographer at Haifa University, Arnon Sofer, got an audience with Ariel Sharon. And Ariel Sharon left and said, "You're right." And that's when he decided to get out of Gaza. And he decided that he had to give up the territories.
Dr. Sheskin, it's been a pleasure to have you. There's so much more we can discuss, and we look forward to having you back.
Pleasure being here.
Thank you very much for joining us.
That's our show for today. Please be sure to visit our website at tolifelachayim.com. Thank you very much for joining us, and remember, to life l'chaim.